What if I told you that one designer almost single-handedly changed how knitting looks like today? Because before Stephen West, knitting was often about tradition, symmetry, and subtle colors. And after Stephen West, suddenly there were neon shawls, unusual shapes, playful construction, and knitters all over the world asking themselves, what if knitting could be art? Today I want to tell the story of Stephen West, who turned knitting into a creative playground and whose influence reaches far beyond the knitting patterns he writes. Because once you look at a Stephen West design, you instantly recognize it, even if you have never knitted one of his patterns before. So let's get started, and let's start at the very beginning. Stephen West didn't grow up planning to become a knitwear designer. He actually grew up in Oklahoma in the United States, and his first passion wasn't yarn, it was dance. He studied dance in college, and that already tells you something about his creative instincts: movement, expression, and performance. Knitting entered his life later, almost accidentally, when he learned it from a friend. And unlike many knitters who first start out by following traditional knitting patterns, Stephen West approached knitting almost like a dancer would approach a choreography, considering it as something expressive, playful, and open to interpretation. After finishing his studies at the University of Illinois, he moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and that move turned out to be pivotal for him. Amsterdam's creative international atmosphere gave him the freedom to experiment, and soon knitting became more than a pastime. It became a language. In 2009, Stephen West published his first knitting pattern, the Boneyard Shawl. And what's so interesting about this pattern is that it is actually very simple. It's a triangular shawl that's knitted in all over stockinette stitch with clean garter lines. Nothing flashy, nothing complicated, just thoughtful design and beautiful proportions. But that pattern quietly introduced what would become a hallmark of his work: accessible construction combined with strong visual impact. The Boneyard Shawl became incredibly popular, and it proved that there was an audience for his design voice. And from that point on, his creativity only expanded. To really understand Stephen West's full impact, it helps to understand how the knitting culture looked like in the early 2000s. At that time, a lot of popular knitwear designs were rooted in tradition. Shawls were often symmetrical, color palettes tended toward neutrals or soft tones, and the designers focused on refinement and technique rather than bold visual statements. And there's nothing wrong with it. Those traditions are beautiful and important. But Stephen West introduced something different. He brought playfulness into knitting. He showed that asymmetry could be interesting, that contrast could be beautiful, that a project didn't have to look classic in order to be wearable. And I think that shift from preservation to exploration is really where his influence lies. If you look at Stephen West's designs today, a few things stand out immediately. First, color. Stephen is known for bold, sometimes unexpected color combinations. And instead of safe palettes, he often encourages knitters to experiment, to mix contrasts, to play with brights, to trust their instincts. Second, construction. Many of his shawls are asymmetrical, modular, or built in surprising ways. And he often combines textures, techniques, and directions of knitting in one piece. And third, joy. His designs feel playful. They encourage experimentation instead of perfection. And I think that's one of the main reasons why his work resonates so strongly. It encourages knitters to experiment. let's talk about a few of his most well-known patterns now. One of them is called Vertices Unite. This shawl is almost architectural in construction, and it's built from several wedge-like sections that come together in an unexpected shape. It's visually striking, but also surprisingly wearable. Then there's the Geogradient Shawl, which plays with color transitions and geometric shapes, creating a piece that feels both modern and graphic. And the Go Go Dynamo Shawl is another example of his love for rhythm and movement in design, combining stripes, textures, and dynamic structure. And of course, we can't talk about Stephen West without mentioning his mystery knit-alongs like the Mystery Music Cal that turn knitting into a shared experience. During those mystery knit-alongs, thousands of knitters cast on a design at the same time, making the knitting process a shared experience without even knowing how the finished object is going to look like. And that idea of simply trusting the process really captures the spirit of his work. Every autumn and a couple more times throughout the year, thousands of knitters cast on together, often choosing bold color combinations, sharing progress photos, and discovering the design step by step. And what I find so fascinating about this is that it shifts knitting from something private that you do alone at home to something truly communal. Instead of quietly finishing a project at home, knitters become part of a collective creative movement. You see people experimenting with different color combinations they wouldn't normally choose. You see people trying out brioche or other techniques for the first time. And you see people getting out of their comfort zones. And I think that's part of Stephen West's real legacy. Not the unusual shawl shapes he creates, but the way he encourages knitters to explore and express themselves creatively. He doesn't just design knitting patterns, he helped create a culture of expressive knitting. And over time, Stephen West didn't just design knitting patterns, he created an entire knitting ecosystem. Together with Malia May Youssef, also known as Penelope, he runs Stephen and Penelope, a yarn store in Amsterdam that has become a destination for knitters from all around the world. The store reflects his aesthetic, colorful, playful, and inspiring. And he's also published several knitting books filled with patterns, photography, and design ideas. And in addition, he also shares tutorials, inspiration, and knitting content on his YouTube channel, helping knitters feel confident trying new techniques. So his impact isn't just the knitting patterns themselves, it's the community he helped build around creative knitting. When I think about Stephen West, I don't think only about colorful shawls. I think about mindset. He helped shift the idea that knitting has to be traditional, perfect, or restrained. He showed us that knitting can be expressive, it can be bold, it can be a visual representation of who we are. Even if your personal style might lean more towards tradition or minimalism, I still think there is something so freeing about his approach. He definitely helped to expand what we think is possible when it comes to knitting, and that is, in my opinion, what a true knitting icon does. And in the end, I think this is the reason why his influence reaches far beyond the knitting patterns that he designs. During my research for this video, I noticed something fascinating. I told you that Stephen West studied dance before becoming a knitwear designer, and I noticed that there is another very popular knitwear designer who followed a similar career path, and that is Veronika Lindberg, who's also known as Kudowa Kika. So if you would like to continue this journey of discovering different knitting icons from around the world. I encourage you to watch the video about Kutovakika next. I'm going to put it on the screen for you, and I'll see you next time. Happy knitting. Take care. Bye.